My parents ignored my birthday for 5 years straight. Let that sink in for a moment. 5 consecutive years where the day that marked my very existence. The day that should have been celebrated even with the smallest gesture, a text, a phone call, a happy birthday was treated like it didn't matter at all. And while I sat in silence, waiting for something, anything, they poured all of their energy, affection, and money into my younger sister. They gave her trips, they gave her parties, they even gave her a brand new Audi. That's not a punchline, that's my reality. And this story, the one I'm about to tell you, isn't just about forgotten birthdays. It's about favoritism so blatant, it might as well have been written in neon lights. It's about a pattern of neglect so sharp that it carved scars into me. Scars I didn't even realize I was carrying until I finally decided to cut them all off. And what happened after? Their desperation turned to panic. And that panic, believe it or not, turned into stalking. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning. I'm 32 now. My sister Lyra is 29. Our parents, Isaac and Lily Mitchell, are what most people would consider comfortably middle class. Dad owns 3 thriving auto repair shops in Westerville, Ohio. Mom runs her own dental practice. They're not millionaires, but money? That was never a problem. Growing up, I never saw them struggle to pay bills or scrape for groceries. If anything, we lived in that sweet spot where you have enough to be secure, but not so much that you're considered rich. Still, they were doing well, and because of that, you'd think love and attention wouldn't need to be rationed. But in our family, it was. And I wasn't the one getting the larger portion. Lyra was always the golden child. Always. Even when we were little, it was obvious. She was prettier. She had that spark, that extroverted, magnetic energy that drew people in. She played sports, and she played them well. She got good grades without even trying. She was the kid everyone at school knew and liked. And me? I was her opposite. I was quiet. Bookish. The kind of kid who spent hours reading under a blanket rather than going to a sleepover. I wasn't unpopular, but I wasn't her. And you know what's funny? As a kid, I thought it would balance out when we grew up. I thought maybe adulthood would level the playing field. Surely my hard work, my achievements, my independence would start to mean something. Surely once we weren't children anymore, my parents would see me for who I was, and finally give me the same recognition they gave her. Spoiler alert. That never happened. The birthday saga began on the 18th of March 2019. My 28th birthday. I had been living in Chicago for nearly 4 years by then. I was working as a software developer for a healthcare organization. I had my own little apartment, my own routines, my own life. I wasn't expecting balloons or cake from my parents. They lived in Ohio, after all, but I expected something. A phone call, a text, a card in the mail, some acknowledgement that, hey, we remember the day you were born, and it still matters to us. But nothing came. The day started quietly, and it ended quietly. No buzz from my phone, no ping from Facebook saying, Mom commented on your post. No voicemail, just silence. 2 days later, I called my mom. She picked up, cheerful as ever. I asked her how things were going, and eventually, I said, "Did you forget something?" That's when she gasped and gave me her line. "Oh honey, I'm so sorry. Work has been crazy at the office, and your dad's been buried in problems at the Maple Street shop. We just forgot." She said it casually, like forgetting your child's birthday wasn't a big deal. She promised to make it up to me, but of course, that promise evaporated. She never did. At the time, I told myself it was a fluke. People forget things, right? Life gets busy. I was living out of state. Maybe they thought I didn't need them to fuss anymore. So I brushed it off, even though deep down, I felt that sting. That sharp reminder that maybe I wasn't as important to them as I wanted to believe. Then came 2020. March 15 passed nothing. Not a single word. 3 days later, I picked up the phone again. Mom answered, and this time she chuckled about it. Actually chuckled, "Sweetie, you know we love you. We're just not good with dates anymore. Getting old, I guess." She laughed like it was funny. Like it was no big deal. My dad took the phone for a moment and mumbled something about sending me something nice for Christmas instead. Well, Christmas rolled around that year. And what did they do? They sent Lyra a beautiful necklace and earring set. Something thoughtful. Something expensive. Something meaningful. And for me? A generic Target gift card. That wasn't just oversight. That was deliberate. That was a message. You don't matter as much. By the third year, 2021, I started to see the pattern, though I still clung to hope that maybe this time would be different. March 17 came and went. My phone, silent. My inbox, empty. Nothing. And then 2 weeks later, I scrolled through Lyra's Instagram. There she was, smiling ear to ear, with my parents standing beside her in Nashville. They'd whisked her away for her birthday. Posh restaurants. Broadway musicals. A weekend trip all about her. And her birthday had been in January. I confronted my mom. So, you remembered Lyra's, but you forgot mine? She didn't even flinch. Lyra needed encouragement after her breakup with Orion. We thought a trip would lift her spirits. You're doing so well in Chicago, honey. You don't need us fussing over you all the time. Do you know what that feels like? To hear your own mother tell you, point blank, that your success means you don't need love or attention anymore? That you're so independent, that you're invisible? It crushed me. And the years that followed? More of the same. 2022. 2023 birthday ignored. Excuses given. While Lyra was showered with gifts and parties, for her 27th birthday, they threw a massive surprise party. Over 50 people there. For her 28th, they reserved the best restaurant in town. Lyra got the spotlight. I got silence. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my own life. 2 promotions at work. Good salary. I bought a condo. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. But underneath it all, the neglect gnawed at me. Every year I told myself I didn't care. Every year I said, I don't need them to remember. I'm an adult. But every year, the hurt resurfaced like a bruise that never fades. The worst part? Lyra never noticed. Or if she did, she didn't care. She'd call me after her big celebrations, practically glowing, telling me how amazing mom and dad were. How lucky we were to have such a supportive family. And I'd bite my tongue, make the polite noises, even though inside I wanted to scream. Then came my 31st birthday. By then, I had stopped expecting. I planned a quiet night at home. Ordered sushi from my favorite place. Opened a nice bottle of wine. Put on a movie. And when the phone stayed silent all day, I wasn't even disappointed anymore. I had numbed myself to it. But the very next day, Callista, my friend, sent me a screenshot from Lyra's Instagram that made my blood boil. There was Lyra, holding up car keys. My parents behind her, beaming. The caption: an early birthday gift from the best parents in the world. They wanted me to be safe on the roads. So blessed. Number grateful, number best parents, number new car. The car? An Audi Q7. Base price, $62,000. And the kicker? This was March 16. The day after my entirely forgotten birthday. I stared at that photo for nearly half an hour. My brain kept circling the same thought. They couldn't even send me a $6 birthday card. But they gave her a $62,000 car. That was it. That was the final straw. That night, I didn't rage. I didn't call and scream. I didn't text a furious message. I didn't even confront Lyra. Instead, I quietly began pulling the plug on all of them. One by one, I blocked them: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, their numbers, their emails. I blocked Lyra. I unfriended family friends who would surely act as flying monkeys, reporting back to my parents. I even blocked Aunt Katie, the family gossip. I didn't make a grand announcement. I didn't write a dramatic farewell message. I just vanished. Slipped out of their digital lives like smoke. And do you know how I felt? Relief. Pure relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The first few days after I vanished from my family's world were surprisingly calm. Almost eerily calm. You'd think cutting off both your parents and your sibling would come with waves of guilt, panic, second guessing. But for me, it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for years. I poured myself into work. I met up with friends more often. I even signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try, but never had time for. For the first time, I wasn't walking around with that constant knot in my chest, wondering why I wasn't enough. I felt free. But that peace didn't last long. About 2 weeks later, my coworker Elon stopped by my desk with a strange look on his face. Hey, Serafina? A woman named Lily Mitchell called the office earlier. Said it was an emergency. She seemed frantic. When I offered to take a message, she just hung up. My stomach dropped. Lily Mitchell. My mom. She had somehow gotten the number to my office line, a number I had never given her. That was the first crack in the calm. It told me they knew. They knew I'd blocked them. The calls didn't stop with that one. According to Alone, they started coming in more frequently. First mom, then dad, then Lyra. Several times a day. The receptionist told me that one time, the woman on the other end, the one who said she was my sister, actually sounded like she was crying. I gave my coworkers a blanket instruction. If anyone called asking for me, just say I'm unavailable and can't take personal calls during business hours. Which, to be fair, was our actual policy. Still, the whole thing made my skin crawl. But the escalation didn't end there. A few weeks into my silence, Callista, the same friend who had shown me the Audi post, sent me screenshots of texts she'd started getting from Lyra. Lyra. Hey Callista. I know you're friends with my sister Serafina. We haven't heard from her in weeks and we're really scared. She's not answering calls or texts. Do you know if she's okay? Callista responded, calm as ever. Callista. I saw her last weekend. She seemed fine to me. Lyra replied almost instantly, Lyra. Oh thank God. We were terrified something horrible had happened. Can you ask her to call home? Mom is beside herself with worry. Callista held firm. Callista. I can suggest it. But she's an adult. If she isn't reaching out, there might be a reason. And then Lyra hit her with the line that nearly made me laugh out loud when I read it. Lyra. I don't know what we could have done wrong. We've always been such a tight family. Tight family. That's how she described us. The same family that had forgotten me 5 years in a row while handing her keys to a $62,000 car. I had to laugh at the audacity, but it wasn't just Callista. Lyra kept pressing, week after week, sending long texts about how devastated my parents were, how they couldn't eat or sleep because they were so worried about me. She even claimed Dad was considering hiring a private detective, and then came the voice message. Callista emailed it to me one afternoon. It was 20 minutes long. Lyra's voice, sobbing and dramatic, spinning a tale of how my absence had broken the family. How Mom cried every day. How Dad was drinking more than usual, which was hilarious, because Dad barely drank at all. How they couldn't understand what they'd done to deserve this. And then, the kicker. We know Serafina's birthday is coming up next year and Mom is already planning something extra special to make up for the past. We just need her to come home so we can be a family again. 5 birthdays missed. 5 years of being invisible. But suddenly, they remembered. Suddenly, they were planning something special. The timing was almost insulting. Around the same time, I started hearing from other people in my circle. My old college roommate, Oilia, messaged me giggling. Apparently, she'd received a long Facebook message from my mom, asking if she had heard from me. The message rambled on about concern for my mental health. But halfway through, Mom couldn't help herself. She launched into paragraphs about Lyra, how successful she was, how happy she was, how proud they were of her new job at Dad's shop. Even in their supposed desperation about me, the spotlight always shifted back to Lyra. Then there was Theon. One of my colleagues. He got a LinkedIn message from my dad, professional sounding, almost formal, asking if Theon had noticed anything off about me at work. If I seemed unstable. If he had concerns about my mental health that the family should be aware of. Theon was so confused he immediately screenshotted it and sent it to me. That, to me, crossed the line. My family could call my friends all they wanted. They could guilt trip them, manipulate them, cry on their shoulders. But the second they tried to drag my workplace into it, that was unforgivable. I didn't respond, of course. But inside, I was boiling. And still, it didn't stop there. Somehow, they tracked down my landlord. Don't ask me how they must have dug through property records or pulled strings through Dad's business connections. But one evening, my landlord, Mr. Navarro, knocked on my door looking bewildered. Hey, I just wanted to check in. Your family's been calling me. They said they're worried about you. Asked if I'd seen you around. I wanted to scream. My private life, my home, wasn't even safe anymore. And then came the calls to my gym, to my dentist's office, to my doctor. They were reaching into every corner of my life, trying to find anyone who could report back on me. At one point, Mom even called the front desk of my building, pretending to be a concerned relative, asking the doorman if he'd seen me come and go. Cassian, the doorman, told me later she'd actually cried on the phone. I remember sitting in my apartment after hearing that, my skin crawling. The level of determination was almost impressive almost. But mostly, it was terrifying. It was no longer just about them missing me. This wasn't love. This wasn't concern. This was control. And when they couldn't control me directly anymore, they tried to manipulate everyone around me instead. And that realization? It made me double down. If there had been any shred of doubt in me, any flicker of guilt that maybe I'd gone too far by cutting them off, that behavior snuffed it out completely. I wasn't the problem here. They were. And for the first time, I stopped questioning that truth. By the time a full month had passed since I'd cut my family off, the situation had turned into something I couldn't have scripted if I tried. What started as silence and freedom for me had quickly become chaos and desperation for them. And I was watching it unfold secondhand, like someone observing a wildfire from a safe distance. It started small, just those phone calls to my office, those awkward attempts to reach me through my friends. But soon it became a coordinated campaign, like they had nothing better to do than invent new ways to break through the wall I had built. Callista became my primary window into their unraveling. Every few days, She'd forward me another text, another message, another ridiculous plea from Lyra. Some of them were almost comical in their melodrama. Lyra. Mom hasn't been sleeping. Dad looks 10 years older. Please, Callista. Just tell her to call us. We don't know what we did wrong. We've always been such a close family. Close family. That phrase kept showing up over and over again, like they thought if they repeated it enough, it would become true. Meanwhile, I sat there with memories stacked like a library of evidence to the contrary. 5 birthdays forgotten, gifts that were afterthoughts, conversations where my accomplishments were brushed off like unimportant trivia. Then came the long voice message. The one I still remember vividly because of how surreal it felt to listen to. 20 minutes of Lyra crying, rambling about how broken they all were without me. She painted pictures of Mom sobbing into her pillow every night, of Dad drowning his sorrows in alcohol. The image of my dad as some tragic drunk would have been funny if it wasn't so manipulative. This is a man who barely drinks a beer at Thanksgiving, and suddenly he's being framed as spiraling into alcoholism because I blocked their number? And then, buried at the end of that sob story, came the hook. We know Serafina's birthday is coming up next year, and Mom is already planning something extra special. We just want her to come home so we can celebrate properly, so we can be a family again. It was almost insulting. 5 years, they couldn't even send me a text. But now that I had disappeared, suddenly they had rediscovered the importance of my birthday? Suddenly it was extra special, please. The desperation escalated in stranger ways too. My college roommate, Oilia, got dragged into it. She sent me a screenshot of a long Facebook message from my mom. At first, it was disguised as concern. We're worried about Serafina, she hasn't been in touch. But halfway through, the letter swerved into bragging about Lyra. How well she was doing at Dad's company. How she was thriving. How proud they were. Even in their panic about me, they couldn't help centering Lyra in the narrative. Then there was Theon, my coworker, who received that bizarre LinkedIn message from my dad. I still remember the look on Theon's face when he came to me with it. Is everything okay with your family? Because this is weird. The message was dressed up in professional language, but underneath it was pure manipulation. My dad was fishing for confirmation that I was unstable. That maybe the problem wasn't how they'd treated me, but some mysterious decline in my mental health. I could see the narrative forming, even from afar. They weren't just panicking, they were rewriting the story. They were reframing my silence as evidence that I was unwell, irrational, maybe even paranoid. It was a convenient excuse, one that painted them as the loving, concerned parents doing everything they could for their troubled daughter. And you know what? That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to stop. Because in their world, they hadn't done anything wrong. Admitting they had mistreated me would shatter the image they held of themselves as the perfect family. So instead, they created a different story. One where I was the problem. I was sick, and they were saints. But if I thought it couldn't get more invasive, I was wrong. They started reaching into my actual life. My landlord, Mr. Navarro, knocked on my door one evening with a sheepish look. Your family's been calling me. Said they were worried about you. Asked if I'd seen you. I swear, my jaw almost hit the floor. I had to reassure him that I was fine, that there was no emergency, that my parents were just over-involved. But inside, I was furious. My home was supposed to be my safe space, and they had infiltrated even that. Then came the gym. Then the dentist. Then, unbelievably, my doctor's office. At my annual physical, the receptionist casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, your parents called here asking about your health." I was stunned. She quickly reassured me they hadn't shared anything, that HIPAA protected me. But the fact that my parents had even tried, had gone so far as to attempt to pry into my medical records made my blood boil. It was no longer just desperate, it was predatory. And the scariest part? They weren't even embarrassed. Every time they were blocked, every time they hit a wall, they just found another way around it. They weren't acting like people who had made a mistake and wanted forgiveness. They were acting like hunters circling prey, determined to corner me no matter how far I ran. And yet, through all of it, I stayed silent. I didn't answer. I didn't break. I didn't give them what they wanted. I watched from my little cocoon of peace, while they spiraled deeper and deeper into madness. There was one night though, where it really hit me. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything. The forgotten birthdays. The Audi. The stalking. And I realized. This was the first time in my life that I truly had the upper hand. For years, I had been the afterthought. The backup child. The independent one who didn't need fussing over. And now, my absence had become the center of their world. They were obsessed with me. My silence had more impact than any words ever could. It was twisted. It was poetic. And for the first time, I felt powerful. By the time I hit the 2-month mark of my silence, The situation had shifted from desperate to something darker, almost surreal. It was like watching a soap opera where the characters had completely lost touch with reality, except this wasn't TV. This was my life. Callista, my unofficial informant at this point, sent me a long email one evening. The subject line was just, "You need to hear this." Attached was a voice memo Lyra had recorded and sent to her. 20 minutes of raw, messy emotion. I sat on my couch, headphones in, and listened. And I'll be honest, part of me laughed. Another part of me felt sick. Lyra's voice was shaky, crying, almost theatrical in the way she laid it all out. She described my absence as if it were the apocalypse. According to her, my mom sobbed every single day. My dad, she claimed, was drinking more than usual. Which would have been funny if it wasn't such an obvious lie. My dad's idea of drinking was half a glass of wine at Christmas. She said the family was breaking apart without me. That they couldn't understand why I had abandoned them. That they were losing hope. But the ending, that was the part that made my blood boil. We know Serafina's birthday is coming up next year, and Mom is already planning something extra special. We just need her to come back so we can celebrate together as a family again. I ripped the earbuds out of my ears. My chest felt tight, not with sadness but with anger. 5 years, 5 long years, they couldn't even be bothered to text me on my birthday. And now, suddenly, because my absence had shaken them, they remembered? Now my birthday was special? No. Too little. Too late. And the thing was, they weren't just playing the "we miss you" card. They were starting to rewrite history. Callista told me that in conversations with her, Lyra had started spinning this bizarre narrative that I had always been jealous of her, that my withdrawal from the family was the result of resentment over her being the favorite, that I had mental health issues bubbling under the surface for years, and now they had finally boiled over. It was complete fiction. Sure, I had noticed the favoritism. Sure, I had resented it at times. But jealousy? No. I didn't want their kind of attention. I didn't want to be showered with cars and jewelry and surprise trips. I wanted something much simpler. Acknowledgement. Respect. A phone call on my birthday. A sense that my life, my achievements, mattered to them. But now, in the story they were telling, I wasn't a neglected daughter finally setting boundaries. I was a troubled, unstable woman who had cut ties because of some imagined paranoia, and they were the loving, patient parents doing everything they could to save me. It was infuriating. And it didn't stop with Lyra's storytelling. My friend Theon pulled me aside one afternoon at work. He looked uncomfortable, almost apologetic. "Hey, I thought you should know. I got another message from your dad on LinkedIn. He was asking about you again. Wanted to know if you were doing okay at work. If there were any concerns." I clenched my fists under my desk. That was it. They weren't just trying to guilt trip me through friends anymore. They were trying to interfere with my professional life. If Theon hadn't known me as well as he did, if he'd been the kind of boss or colleague who took things like that seriously, those lies could have wrecked my career. And still, I stayed silent. But then it got worse. Mr. Navarro, my landlord, knocked on my door one evening. He's a sweet man in his late 50s, always polite, never intrusive. But that night, he looked troubled. "Your family's been calling me," he said carefully. "They told me they're worried about you. Asked if I'd seen you around the building." My blood ran cold. "They what?" He nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't tell them anything, of course. But I thought you should know." I thanked him, closed the door, and leaned against it with my heart pounding. My home, my safe space had been invaded. They hadn't physically broken in, but in a way, it felt worse. They were probing, pushing, trying to pry open every door into my life. And it didn't end with him. The receptionist at my dentist's office mentioned a strange call from someone claiming to be family, asking about my appointments. My doctor's office told me the same thing during my annual checkup, that my parents had called multiple times, trying to dig for information about my health. Luckily, HIPAA was on my side. But the fact that they had even tried sent shivers down my spine. Then came the building itself. My doorman, Cassian, caught me one evening and said, "Hey, just so you know, a woman called the main office asking if you still live here. She was crying, said she was your mother." I felt sick. It wasn't just desperation anymore. It was obsession, stalking, plain and simple. And yet, even as all of this unfolded, they kept up the same narrative. Every letter, every message, every phone call wasn't about what they had done. It was about how much they loved me, how much they missed me, how much the family wasn't whole without me. Never once did they say the words I needed to hear. "We're sorry we forgot your birthdays. We're sorry we treated you differently. We're sorry we made you feel less." Not once. Instead, I started receiving actual letters in the mail. Handwritten notes from my mom, Pages long. Dripping with sentimentality. We never meant to hurt you. I'm sorry if you felt neglected. If I felt neglected. Not. We neglected you. The kind of apology that isn't really an apology at all. Then came the packages. Boxes filled with my favorite childhood snacks. Books they thought I'd enjoy. Little trinkets that were supposed to be thoughtful. It was almost insulting. For 5 years, they hadn't remembered a single thing about me. Now suddenly, they knew my tastes? Now suddenly, they cared? And Dad, ever the businessman, took a different approach. One day, I opened the mail to find a typed, formal letter. In it, he admitted there might have been communication challenges in our family. He even suggested we go to a counselor together, as adults. It was the most rational thing he'd done in years, but even then, he couldn't quite say it. He couldn't admit the truth. He wrote that they may have unintentionally favored Lyra. Unintentionally. There was nothing unintentional about dropping 60 grand on a car for her the day after forgetting my birthday. There was nothing unintentional about years of one-sided gifts, parties, and trips. This wasn't a slip-up. It was a pattern. A choice. And sitting there, surrounded by unopened letters and unwanted packages, I realized something crystal clear. They weren't trying to make things right. They were trying to reel me back in. They didn't want me back because they loved me. They wanted me back because my absence shattered their perfect family image. And I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. 6 months into my silence, the situation had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as ignored birthdays and favoritism had morphed into a bizarre theater of obsession, manipulation, and full-blown stalking. And through it all, I remained silent, watching from the shadows as my family unraveled. But before I tell you about the breaking point, let me paint you a picture of how strange things had become. Callista was still my main source of updates. At this point, she was practically my secret informant, sending me screenshots and voice recordings every other day. Some of the things Lyra said to her were so ridiculous, I had to read them twice to believe them. For instance, Lyra once texted her, "We think Serafina is having some kind of breakdown. She's always been jealous of me, but this time it's worse. We're terrified she might hurt herself." Jealous. That word again. It was like they couldn't imagine any reality where I was simply hurt and tired of being treated like an afterthought. No. It had to be jealousy, because if I was jealous, then the problem wasn't them, it was me. And the breakdown narrative? That was the cherry on top. Suddenly, I wasn't an adult making a rational decision to cut ties. I was unstable. I was irrational. I was sick. That way, they could keep their illusion intact, that they were good parents. And I was the broken one. Callista told me that Lyra had even asked her to keep an eye on me. As if I were some dangerous patient under surveillance. She gave Callista her phone number and said, "If Serafina ever seems depressed or says anything scary, call me immediately. We're ready to stage an intervention if needed." An intervention. For what? For having boundaries? For refusing to let them gaslight me into oblivion? The audacity was staggering. But it didn't stop there. One day, Theon, my coworker, came over to my desk again. He looked half amused, half disturbed. I just got a weird message from someone named Katie Miller asking about you. Says she's a family friend. Wants to know if you're okay." I raised an eyebrow. Katie Miller? I didn't know anyone by that name. Theon showed me the profile. A stock photo. Brand new account. No mutual friends. No history. It was fake, obviously fake. That's when it hit me. My family had started creating fake accounts to spy on me, to contact my friends, to worm their way back into my life. It wasn't just stalking anymore. It was deceit. Manipulation. And the most disturbing part? They weren't even subtle about it. Callista happened to run into Lyra at a coffee shop around that time. The conversation she relayed to me afterwards still makes my stomach turn. Lyra told her that I had been unstable for years. That I was paranoid and believed our parents loved her more. She claimed they had offered to pay for my therapy multiple times, but that I refused. That was a flat-out lie. The only time I ever mentioned therapy to my mom, her response had been, "What for? You seem fine." And now they were spinning it like I was a stubborn, unstable daughter rejecting their help. Callista, bless her, didn't buy a word of it. She told Lyra, "Honestly, Serafina seems perfectly fine to me. Maybe she's not talking to you because there's a reason." Apparently, Lyra didn't like that response. She got defensive, frustrated. She even tried to guilt-trip Callista by saying, "We're such a tight family. She knows how much we love her." It was always the same refrain. Tight family. Tight family. Tight family. Like a broken record they thought would hypnotize people into believing their version of events. But the truth was, it only pushed me further away. Because by now, I was noticing something deeper, patterns I hadn't even fully recognized before. One evening, while sorting through old photos on my laptop, I stumbled across family pictures from over the years. And when I looked at them with fresh eyes, the favoritism was glaring. In every birthday picture, Lyra was the center of attention, surrounded by gifts and smiles. I was somewhere on the edge of the frame, half forgotten. At Christmas, the pile of presents in front of her was always twice the size of mine. Graduation photos? My parents were beaming at her, arms wrapped around her shoulders, while my photos looked rushed, obligatory. And then there was the car situation. Lyra got a practically new Honda Civic when she was 16. My dad even spent weeks test driving cars with her to make sure she got the perfect one. When I turned 16, I inherited his old beat-up pickup truck that smelled like oil and barely started in the winter. His words? It'll teach you responsibility. College told the same story. Lyra went to Ohio State, and my parents covered tuition, housing, expenses, even took her and her friends out to dinner regularly. I went to a smaller state school on a partial scholarship, working 20 hours a week at the library just to survive. When I called home stressed about money, my mom said, "You're so independent, honey. We know you can handle anything." Independent. Their favorite word, their excuse for neglect. And the pattern didn't stop in adulthood. When Lyra graduated, confused about her career, they supported her for a full year while she found herself. Dad even gave her a position in one of his shops, despite her degree being irrelevant. When I landed a computer science job in Chicago, I got a flat. "That's nice, dear. We're proud of you." No offer to help with moving. No excitement. Just indifference. It all came flooding back, detail after detail, memory after memory. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became, because it wasn't just about birthdays. It was about a lifetime of being invisible. And now, after all of that, they had the audacity to rewrite history, to act like I was unstable, jealous, paranoid, to turn themselves into martyrs while painting me as the villain. But here's the thing. I wasn't falling for it anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible child. I was the one pulling the strings. I was the one who decided when the story ended, and that realization, it gave me strength. Strength to stay silent, strength to resist their games, strength to finally, fully, cut them out of my life. 7 months into my silence, the story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just that my family was spiraling, it was that they were reinventing reality, brick by brick, until the version they told others barely resembled the truth. Callista, my ever-patient informant, had another run-in with Lyra, this time at a coffee shop. According to Callista, the conversation was unsettling. Lyra wasted no time diving into her favorite narrative, that I was unstable, that I had always been jealous, that I had built up delusions about being unloved. She even claimed my parents had offered to pay for my therapy multiple times, but that I refused. When Callista told me that, I almost choked on my tea. Pay for therapy? These were the same parents who laughed when I once mentioned I was seeing a counselor. My mom's exact words had been, "What for? You seem fine." And now, suddenly, they were the kind of enlightened parents who were practically begging me to get help. The lies weren't even consistent. They were just whatever sounded good in the moment. But the worst part wasn't the lies, it was the gaslighting. Lyra apparently told Callista, "She thinks we love me more than her, but that's just not true. Our parents love us equally. She's just paranoid." Paranoid. That word stuck with me. Because if you call someone paranoid, you don't have to take their concerns seriously. You don't have to admit that maybe you did favor one child over the other. You can just dismiss it as delusion. And that was exactly what they were doing, reframing my reality as a mental illness. Callista, bless her soul, pushed back. She said, "Honestly, Serafina seems fine to me. Maybe if she's not talking to you, there's a reason." Lyra did not like that. She apparently grew irritated, insisting, "We've always been a tight family. She knows how much we love her." There it was again. The broken record phrase, tight family, tight family, tight family. If they said it enough times, maybe people would believe it. But I wasn't buying it anymore. And while they were spinning lies in public, behind the scenes their tactics were getting creepier. Around this time, my building's doorman, Cassian, pulled me aside. "Hey, just so you know, a woman's been calling the main office. Said she was your mom. She was crying, asking if you lived here, and if we'd seen you." I felt my stomach drop. My home wasn't safe anymore, not really. Sure, the staff didn't give her any information, but the fact that she even called, that she thought it was okay to interrogate the building staff about my comings and goings? It was chilling. And then came the fake accounts. My coworker Theon showed me another strange message, this time from a Katie Miller. No profile picture, brand new account, no history, just a single message. Hi, I'm a family friend of Serafina. We're very worried about her. Could you please ask her to contact her family? Thank you. Theon looked at me with wide eyes. This is your family, isn't it? I nodded, my throat tight. It was obvious. They were making fake social media profiles to stalk me, to infiltrate my circle, to pressure people into reaching out on their behalf. It was one thing to call my landlord, my doctor, my gym. But to create fake personas to spy on me? That was another level. That wasn't just desperation, that was deceit. And it wasn't just about contacting me, it was about rewriting the entire narrative. Lyra's story was evolving. At first, she had painted me as unstable, jealous, paranoid. Now, she was casting herself as the victim. Callista told me that Lyra claimed she felt like she had lost her best friend. That she and I had been inseparable. That she had always looked up to me. That my disappearance had left a hole in her life. Revisionist history, at its finest. Lyra and I had never been best friends. We had been polite siblings who got along, sure, but inseparable? No. Role model? No. If anything, I had been invisible. But in Lyra's rewritten story, I wasn't just her sister, I was her soulmate, her confidant, her everything. And my absence wasn't about my parents' neglect, it was about her being abandoned. Suddenly, she was the tragic figure. She was the one who lost the most. And as if that wasn't manipulative enough, Callista said Lyra even asked her to keep an eye on me. To report back if I seemed sad or depressed. She gave Callista her phone number, like she was some kind of emergency contact. That was the part that made my skin crawl. Because it meant they weren't just trying to pull me back, they were preparing to force me back, under the guise of help, an intervention, a staged rescue, a performance. And that realization that they were willing to fabricate an entire alternate reality just to avoid admitting their own faults, was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to stop, not unless I made it stop, so I tightened my boundaries. I became more careful about my schedule, less predictable. I watched my back. Because when people are that desperate, that manipulative, you can't trust what they'll do next. And the irony? The more they tried to control me, the more power I realized I had. My silence was driving them insane. My absence had more impact than my presence ever did. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible one. For the first time, I was the center of the story, and I was the one holding all the cards. By the 8th month of silence, things had taken such a bizarre turn that even my closest friends started saying, "Are you sure this isn't a Netflix series?" Because honestly, it felt like one. My family's descent into obsession wasn't just dramatic, it was theatrical. Callista was the first to tip me off to the latest stunt. She sent me a screenshot of a Facebook event invitation. The title? Serafina's 32nd birthday celebration. At first, I thought it was a joke. A parody. Something someone made to mock my parents. But no, this was real. The event had been created by Lyra. The description read like a Hallmark card gone wrong. Even though our beloved Serafina can't be with us this year, we're going to celebrate her anyway. We'll gather at Mom and Dad's house to share memories, look at photos, and send love to someone very special we miss every day. Serafina, if you see this, please know you are loved, missed, and always welcome home. And the guest list? 60 people. Extended relatives, family friends, old neighbors, even some of my former high school classmates I barely remembered. I stared at the screen, jaw slack. My family had forgotten 5 birthdays in a row. But now that I was gone, they were throwing a massive party in my honor, a public spectacle, designed not for me, but for their own image. Because that's what it was, a PR campaign. A way to prove to the world that they were loving parents with a tight family, tragically torn apart by their unstable daughter. It was brilliant in its manipulation. And disgusting in its execution. Callista, bless her, said, "Don't worry. I already RSVP'd no." But what struck me most wasn't the event itself, it was who they had invited. Scattered among the names were several of my current Chicago friends, people who had nothing to do with my past, people they could only have found by stalking my social media. That was when it hit me. They weren't just watching me. They were expanding the circle. Pulling in my present life, my current relationships, trying to control me through the people I cared about. And the irony? The event never even happened. Someone, maybe Aunt Katie, the infamous family gossip, must have realized how unhinged it looked, because a week before my birthday, the event disappeared, deleted. But not before I screenshotted every single detail. When my actual birthday rolled around, I didn't waste a single thought on them. I went out with my friends in Chicago, had an amazing dinner, laughed until my sides hurt. It was the best birthday I'd had in years. No guilt, no disappointment, no waiting for a phone call that would never come. But according to Callista, my parents spent that same day calling hospitals in Chicago, convinced the only reason I wouldn't show up to my party was because I was dead or in critical condition. The delusion was complete. And as the months rolled on, I saw the cracks begin to spread in their carefully constructed facade. Lyra's Instagram feed, once a highlight reel of perfect selfies and luxury dinners, shifted into something darker. Cryptic captions about missing pieces and family being everything. Throwback photos of the two of us with hashtags like #sistersforever and #comehome. She even posted a picture of herself with my parents at a restaurant, all three of them looking somber. Captioned, "Some chairs feel empty tonight. Family isn't the same when someone is missing." She tagged me in it. Of course, I only saw it because Callista sent me a screenshot. My block meant nothing when they had flying monkeys ready to forward everything. And while Lyra leaned into the role of tragic victim online, reality was starting to eat away at her perfect image. Callista told me she had either quit or been fired from Dad's business. The stories varied, but the truth was clear. She wasn't thriving anymore. She had moved back in with my parents. She was gaining weight, losing friends, posting less. The golden child was tarnishing. And my parents? They weren't doing much better. Dad's business began to falter. Family friends whispered about bad decisions, missed opportunities, a distracted owner who seemed more obsessed with his estranged daughter than his shops. Mom had taken time off from her dental practice. Both of them had grown heavier, more reclusive. They weren't the polished, confident couple they once presented to the world. At some point, they even hired a private investigator. Paid thousands of dollars to confirm what they could have figured out by doing nothing. That I was alive, well, thriving in Chicago. The investigator told them I had a good job, strong friendships, a normal life. But of course, he couldn't tell them why I had cut ties. That part wasn't written in any public record, and that drove them insane, because in their version of reality, there couldn't be a valid reason. No, it had to be an outside influence. I had been indoctrinated. Or maybe I was in an abusive relationship. Or maybe I had joined some toxic group in Chicago. Any story was easier for them to swallow than the truth. That I left because they never really saw me. And honestly, watching them spiral, watching their empire of denial crumble, gave me something I never thought I'd feel again. Peace. For the first time in my life I was free. No guilt. No begging for scraps of attention. No fighting for equality that was never going to come. Just peace. And as twisted as it sounds, the more they panicked, the calmer I became. Because I finally understood the power of silence. They had forgotten me for 5 years. Now they would spend every day remembering me, obsessing over me, wondering if I would ever come back. And that, to me, was poetic justice. By the time the 1-year mark of my silence came around, something inside me had shifted completely. What had started as a desperate attempt to protect myself had transformed into the healthiest, most liberating choice I had ever made. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't waiting for a phone call that would inevitably disappoint me. I wasn't forcing myself to smile at family dinners where my achievements were brushed aside like afterthoughts. Instead, I was living, really living. My job performance skyrocketed. Without the constant emotional drain, I found myself excelling in ways I never expected. I started dating again, and this time it wasn't out of loneliness or trying to fill a void. It was genuine connection. I signed up for pottery classes. I spent more weekends with friends. I laughed more, slept better, breathed easier. And yet, even as I thrived, my family continued to disintegrate under the weight of their own denial. Lyra's facade had cracked wide open. She had left Dad's business, whether by choice or by force, no one really knew, and moved back home. Friends who once flocked to her Instagram now whispered that she seemed lost, heavier, unmotivated. Her perfect life was unraveling thread by thread. My parents weren't faring much better. Dad's once booming auto shops were now struggling. Mom, once the polished professional dentist, had pulled back from her practice. They were both withdrawing from their social circles, showing up less to gatherings, looking tired, heavier, and distracted when they did. Family friends started talking. Quietly, at first. The narrative shifted from, "Such a close family, it's tragic what happened with Serafina," to "Something's off with the Mitchells." And in their desperation to preserve their image, my parents doubled down on the lies. According to Aunt Katie, the family gossip queen, they told people I had fallen in with a bad crowd in Chicago. That I was in an abusive relationship with someone controlling me. That I had been brainwashed against them. Every story painted them as the victims. Every story erased their role in driving me away. But here's the truth I finally accepted. They weren't capable of self-reflection, to admit what they had done, to say, "Yes, we neglected you. Yes, we treated you like an afterthought. Yes, we failed you," would mean shattering their own self-image. And that was something they simply could not do. So instead, they built elaborate fictions. And I let them. Because they're delusions? Not my problem. What mattered was me. My healing. My peace. And oh, the peace was intoxicating. I had no idea how much emotional energy I had wasted on resentment until it was gone. I had no idea how heavy that invisible weight had been until I put it down. The irony was beautiful. By cutting them off, I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply saving myself. And that very act, the quiet, unapologetic refusal to play their game, was the most devastating thing I could have done, because my silence screamed louder than any words ever could. They forgot me for 5 straight birthdays. Now they spent every single day obsessing over me, desperate for a glimpse, a response, a crack in the wall I had built. That's what real poetic justice looks like. And as I sat in my Chicago apartment, surrounded by friends who had become my chosen family, I realized something profound. I didn't miss them. Not the anxiety, not the favoritism, not the endless competition for scraps of love. What I had gained, peace, self-respect, freedom, was worth more than anything I had lost. And once you taste that kind of peace, you don't go back. Even though I had cut them off for over a year, my family's obsession didn't stop. It evolved. If anything, it became more creative, more desperate, more manipulative. The first wave had been frantic phone calls. Then came the fake social media accounts, the stalking of my landlord, co-workers, even my doctor's office. But now, they tried a new tactic. The art of the non-apology apology. It started with letters. Long, handwritten notes from my mom. Carefully crafted to sound heartfelt but always missing the one thing that mattered. Responsibility. One of her letters said, "I'm sorry if you felt neglected. We never meant for you to feel less important than Lyra. If we made mistakes, we want to make them right. Please come home for Sunday dinner so we can sort this out." Notice the wording? Sorry if you felt. Not, sorry we did. The blame was still on me, on my perception, on my feelings, never on their actions. Then came the packages. Boxes filled with my favorite childhood snacks, books they thought I'd enjoy, little trinkets. Each with a note begging me to call. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. After forgetting my birthday 5 years in a row, suddenly they remembered every tiny detail of what I liked. Suddenly they cared enough to send gifts. Where was that energy when I was a teenager blowing out candles alone? And then there was my dad. Unlike my mom's flowery letters, his approach was clinical. He sent me a typed, businesslike letter, acknowledging there had been communication challenges in the family. He admitted they may have unintentionally favored Lyra, and suggested we see a family counselor together. On the surface, it sounded mature, reasonable, even. But the more I read it, the more hollow it felt. Unintentionally favored? Spending $60,000 on a car for one child while forgetting the other's existence wasn't unintentional, it was deliberate. It was systemic, it was a choice. And counseling? What good would that do if they couldn't even admit the truth? Still, these letters and packages kept arriving, week after week. It was almost comical, like they were trying every angle. Guilt, bribery, reason, nostalgia, hoping one would crack me open. But here's the thing. Once you've tasted real peace, once you've seen how much better life is without manipulation, you can't be bought back with cookies and handwritten notes. Meanwhile, Lyra was unraveling further. According to Callista, she had started seeing a therapist, but not to address her own issues. No, her therapy sessions were apparently all about me, about how she had lost her best friend, about how she didn't know what she did wrong, about how her life felt empty without me. She told people I had always been her role model, that I was the most important person in her life. Revisionist history again. We had never been that close. She had never treated me like a role model. But now, in her rewritten story, my absence was destroying her, and somehow, that made her the victim. My parents leaned into that narrative hard. They started telling people I was having a mental health crisis, that my silence had nothing to do with them. They positioned themselves as the loving, concerned parents of a daughter who had suddenly gone off the deep end. It was genius, in a twisted way. They got to keep their reputation intact. They got sympathy from friends and neighbors. And best of all, they didn't have to face the mirror. But the cracks were showing. Their businesses were slipping. Their social standing was fading. Lyra was floundering. And still, not once, not a single time did they say the words that might have made a difference. We're sorry. We hurt you. We favored your sister. We failed you. Instead, they kept spinning stories, sending packages, inventing excuses. And me? I just sat back, silent, calm, free. Because I finally understood something profound. You don't need revenge. You don't need dramatic confrontations. You don't even need closure from the people who hurt you. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Just live your life. Just let them spin in their own web of denial. Just keep your peace. And that, I realized, was the greatest justice of all. By the 10th month of silence, my family's behavior had gone from desperate to downright surreal. Callista, my unintentional undercover agent, continued to feed me updates, and each one sounded more absurd than the last. Lyra, apparently, had turned my disappearance into her entire personality. She told anyone who would listen that she was devastated, broken, unable to function without her beloved sister. She even wrote my friend Olia a 5-page handwritten letter. 5 pages. In it, she rambled about our childhood, about inside jokes that only half existed, about how she couldn't live without me. She begged Olia to tell her what she had done wrong, to reveal the secret that had made me turn away. When Olia showed me the letter, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Because the relationship she described, the inseparable bond, the deep sisterhood, it wasn't real. We had never been that close. She was rewriting history, reshaping me into the missing puzzle piece of her identity, when in reality, I had been little more than a supporting character in the drama of her golden child life. But the part that truly unsettled Olia? The letter didn't just reminisce. It contained strange declarations, almost obsessive in tone, about how she felt like half of herself without me, about how she couldn't breathe properly knowing I wasn't in her life. It didn't read like grief. It read like obsession, and Lyra wasn't the only one unraveling. Dad's business, the once thriving auto shops, was crumbling. Family friends whispered about financial trouble, about missed deadlines, about his distracted leadership. He was no longer the confident entrepreneur. He was the man who couldn't stop obsessing over the daughter who had walked away. Mom wasn't much better. She had taken extended time off from her dental practice. Some said she was depressed. Others said she spent her days trying to track me down, calling anyone and everyone who might have had the misfortune of knowing me. They were both heavier, more tired, less social. The Mitchells, once the image of middle-class success, were unraveling before the town's eyes. And still not once did they admit fault. Instead, they spent thousands on a private investigator. Thousands. The investigator confirmed what they already knew. I was alive. I was thriving. I had a stable job, good friends, a regular life. But he couldn't answer the one question they refused to face. Why? Why had I cut them off? Why was I gone? And since they couldn't face the real answer, they invented new ones. Aunt Katie, the family gossip, became their unofficial spokesperson. She told anyone who would listen that I had fallen into a bad crowd in Chicago, that I was in an abusive relationship, that someone was manipulating me, turning me against my family. Every story was dramatic. Every story absolved them of blame, because in their world, I couldn't have simply left because of their neglect. No, there had to be an external villain, some sinister influence, anything but the truth. And while they told their stories, I kept living mine. My life was normal. Beautifully, gloriously normal. I went to work. I hung out with friends. I went on dates. I explored new hobbies. I laughed. I healed. I didn't miss them. I didn't crave their approval. I didn't feel guilty. And in that realization, I found my greatest strength. Because here's the truth. Sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is walk away. Not with fireworks, not with a dramatic speech, not with a final showdown, just quietly, firmly, permanently. And that silence? It shook their world more than any confrontation ever could. By month 11, my family's spiral had reached a level that was both disturbing and strangely predictable. Callista called me one night and said, "You're not going to believe this one." And honestly, at this point, I didn't doubt her. Every new update sounded like it had been plucked straight out of a soap opera. Apparently my parents had hosted a birthday party for me without me. Yes, you heard that right. After forgetting my birthday 5 years in a row, they suddenly decided to make a spectacle out of celebrating me in absentia. Lyra created a Facebook event titled, Serafina's 32nd birthday celebration. Wherever you are, we love you. She invited more than 60 people. Extended relatives, old family friends, even some of my former high school classmates I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The description of the event read like a bizarre plea for sympathy. Even though our beloved Serafina can't be with us this year, we'll gather to share memories, look at photos, and send love to someone very special we miss every day. Serafina, if you see this, please know you are loved, missed, and always welcome home. It is neither is wetis. People commented things like, "What a beautiful idea," or, "I hope she realizes how much her family loves her." It was propaganda, plain and simple. A carefully crafted PR campaign to paint them as the grieving, loving family abandoned by their cruel, ungrateful daughter. The irony was almost unbearable. They couldn't remember to send me a $5 card when I was actually present in their lives, but now that I was gone, they were willing to throw a full-scale party in my honor, just so everyone else could see how devoted they were. And the part that really chilled me? They didn't just invite people from the past. Somehow, Lyra had tracked down several of my current Chicago friends and added them to the guest list. People who had nothing to do with my old life. People she could only have found through social media stalking. That was the moment I realized just how far they were willing to go. This wasn't just desperation. This was an invasion. A refusal to let me have a life outside of their narrative. Thankfully, the party never actually happened. Someone, probably Aunt Katie, must have pointed out how unhinged it looked. Because a week before my birthday, the event was quietly deleted, but not before Callista screenshotted the whole thing and sent it my way. When my real birthday arrived, I celebrated with friends in Chicago. We went to dinner, we laughed, we toasted to freedom. It was the best birthday I'd had in years. No guilt, no waiting by the phone, no pretending to be happy while swallowing hurt. Meanwhile, according to Callista, my parents spent that same day calling hospitals around Chicago, convinced the only explanation for my absence was that I was dead. The delusion was complete. And yet, as ridiculous as their behavior became, I couldn't help but see the tragic undertone. Because underneath all the theatrics, the parties, the gossip, and the stalking, one fact remained: they couldn't accept the truth. They couldn't accept that their actions, the favoritism, the neglect, the years of forgetting had consequences. They couldn't accept that I had chosen peace over their dysfunction. So instead, they created stories, staged performances, rewrote history. Anything to avoid facing themselves. And me? I just lived. I went to work. I spent time with friends. I nurtured my new relationship. I learned pottery. I healed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by their narrative. I was free. As the 1-year mark of silence fully settled in, I realized something. While my family's life was spiraling into chaos, mine was blossoming into something I had never experienced before: stability. But stability didn't mean their chaos disappeared. In fact, it only got louder. According to Callista, things at my parents' house had reached an unbearable tension. Lyra had officially quit, or been fired from Dad's auto business. The stories varied depending on who you asked. Some said she stormed out after an argument. Others whispered that Dad couldn't keep covering for her mistakes. Either way, she was back living at home, unemployed, restless, and miserable. Her once glamorous Instagram feed had shifted from staged photos of brunches and vacations, to vague, sad captions about missing someone important and hoping for healing. Occasionally, she'd post throwback pictures of us together, painting a fantasy of sisterhood that never really existed. And my parents? They weren't handling it any better. Dad's business, once his pride and joy, was faltering. Customers complained about his distracted demeanor. He missed deadlines. He lost contracts. A man who used to exude confidence now looked disheveled, constantly distracted, carrying a weight he couldn't put down. Mom, meanwhile, had started taking long leaves from her dental practice. Some family friends speculated she was depressed. Others said she spent hours every day obsessively calling around, trying to find new ways to reach me. They were shadows of who they used to be. And still not once, not a single time, did they admit fault. Instead, they doubled down on their narrative. Family friends reported hearing the same story over and over. Serafina has been brainwashed by people in Chicago. Or, she's in a toxic relationship and can't see it. Or my personal favorite, she's having a mental breakdown, and we're just doing everything we can to support her. Every story painted them as loving, caring, blameless. Every story erased me as an independent adult who had made a conscious choice. It was infuriating, but also freeing, because the more lies they spun, the more I realized I didn't have to correct them. Their story wasn't mine. Their delusion wasn't my responsibility. Their obsession wasn't my burden. And while they fell apart, I thrived. I had my best year at work, receiving glowing performance reviews and a major raise. I traveled with friends, experiencing joy without the cloud of guilt. I deepened my relationship with someone who truly saw me, respected me, and valued me in a way my family never had. Most importantly, I learned to breathe. Really breathe. Without waiting for the next disappointment. Without bracing for the next reminder that I was less than. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. They lived in a prison of denial and self-inflicted chaos. I lived in freedom. And that, to me, was the ultimate victory. So here I am, over a year since I cut my family off. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes, silence is louder than any words. They ignored my birthday for 5 straight years. They made excuses. They played favorites. They pretended it didn't matter. But when I finally stopped chasing scraps of attention, when I finally walked away, that silence broke them in ways I never could have imagined. They threw parties for me without me. They stalked my friends, my coworkers, even my landlord. They hired investigators, spun lies, rewrote history. Anything to avoid the truth. And the truth is simple. I was never asking for much. A phone call, a card, a little effort, recognition that I mattered, just as much as my sister. They couldn't give me that. But you know what? Walking away gave me something better. It gave me peace. It gave me freedom. It gave me the clarity to see that I don't need their approval, their attention, or even their love to be whole. Because sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the family that lifts you up. Sometimes, you have to create your own family through friends, through partners, through the life you build on your own terms. I don't hate my parents. I don't even hate my sister. What I feel now is nothing. And that nothing? That's liberation. They forgot me for 5 years. Now they'll spend the rest of their lives remembering what they lost. And me? I'll be too busy living. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You don't have to keep setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You don't have to beg people to value you. And you don't have to stay in places that hurt you just because they're called family. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away. And when you do, you'll discover what I did. That peace, real peace, is worth more than any car, any party, any empty words of love. It's worth everything. You might be wondering what about the future? Because yes, it's been over a year since I cut them off. But life doesn't stop. Holidays come around. Emergencies happen. People get sick. And people always ask me the same thing. Would you ever go back? And my honest answer is, I don't know. Not because I secretly want reconciliation. Not because I feel guilty. But because life is unpredictable. If something catastrophic happened like a serious illness, I'd have to make a choice in that moment. But here's the key difference now. It would be my choice. Not their demand. Not their manipulation. Not their guilt trips. Mine. For now, I've created new traditions. My friends in Chicago have basically adopted me into their families. Last Christmas, I had dinner surrounded by people who actually wanted me there. People who asked about my life, who celebrated me without conditions. And you know what? It was the best holiday I'd had in years. I've also thought about the what ifs. What if Dad's business collapses completely? What if Mom gets sick? What if Lyra shows up on my doorstep one day? I can't predict those things. But I can say this. I won't go back to being the afterthought. I won't go back to begging for crumbs of affection. If reconciliation ever happens, it won't be on their terms. It will only happen if they look me in the eye and say the words they've avoided for so long. We were wrong. We hurt you. And we're sorry. Until then, I'm okay with the silence. In fact, I welcome it. Because here's the real twist ending to my story. They thought cutting me off, or rather, me cutting them off would destroy me. But in reality, it set me free. And maybe, just maybe one day they'll realize the same thing. That love without accountability isn't love. That family without respect isn't family. That silence, when chosen, is not cruelty. It's survival. So yes, this is the bonus update. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And every day I wake up knowing that I don't have to fight for a place at a table where I was never truly welcome. And to me that's worth everything. If you've stayed with me this far, maybe it's because some part of my story felt familiar. And that's what I want to talk about now. Not just my family, not just my pain, but the bigger picture. Because the truth is, my story isn't rare. Families play favorites, parents neglect, siblings compete. And too often, the one who suffers in silence convinces themselves that maybe they're overreacting. Maybe they're too sensitive. Maybe they should just accept it. I told myself those lies for years. Every forgotten birthday, every brushed off phone call, every gift card that screamed, "We didn't think about you at all." I swallowed it. I told myself I was independent, strong, above needing their attention. But the truth? It hurt. It burned, year after year, until I realized the only way to stop the pain was to stop playing the game. Walking away didn't mean I didn't care. It meant I finally cared about myself enough to stop begging for love that should have been unconditional. And that's what I want you, yes, you, watching or listening right now to understand. If you feel invisible in your own family, if you feel like you're always the second choice, the background character, the one they'll get around to later, you're not crazy, you're not imagining it, and you don't have to stay. Walking away doesn't make you cruel. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. Protecting your peace doesn't make you heartless. It makes you human. And here's the part I wish someone had told me years ago. It's okay to want love. It's okay to want recognition. It's okay to want your parents to see you. That doesn't make you needy, it makes you normal. But if they can't give you that, If they won't even try, then you owe it to yourself to stop bleeding for people who don't even notice your cut. Family is more than blood. Family is who shows up. Family is who listens. Family is who celebrates you when you succeed, comforts you when you fail, and remembers you not just on your birthday, but every day in between. If you haven't found that yet, keep looking. Because it's out there. I promise you. It's out there. I found it in friends who became my chosen family. I found it in a partner who sees me. Really sees me. I found it in myself. And that, more than anything, is why I can sit here today, tell this story, and smile. Because yes, I lost my family. But in losing them, I found myself. And that's a trait I'll never regret. When I look back on everything, I can break my story down into 3 simple truths. First, patterns don't lie. It wasn't one missed birthday that broke me, it was 5 years of the same thing. It was the constant favoritism, the excuses, the way they made me feel invisible while putting my sister on a pedestal. If you see a pattern, trust it. Stop explaining it away. Second, silence speaks louder than confrontation. I didn't scream. I didn't send a dramatic farewell text. I didn't demand apologies they were never going to give. I just disappeared. And that silence? It said everything. Sometimes, walking away says more than 1,000 arguments ever could. Third, peace is priceless. Cutting ties wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about choosing myself. And what I gained: freedom, self-respect, calm, real joy was worth infinitely more than what I lost. And that's what I want to leave you with. If you're struggling with a family that doesn't see you, remember, you're not broken. You're not unworthy. You don't need to prove your value to people who refuse to recognize it. You already matter. You already deserve love. You already deserve peace. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do, the thing that changes your life, is to simply stop chasing people who keep running away. That's what I did. And it saved me. So, whether your story looks like mine or not, I hope this gives you permission to choose yourself. Because at the end of the day, the greatest gift you can give yourself is freedom. And that is my story. A story about 5 forgotten birthdays. A story about favoritism, silence, and finally, freedom. But more than that, it's a story about learning to choose myself. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. Because telling this wasn't easy. Reliving all those years of feeling invisible, of being the backup child. It stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried. But sharing it with you gave me something powerful. Perspective. And maybe, just maybe, it gave you something too. Maybe it reminded you that you're not alone. Maybe it showed you that it's okay to set boundaries. Maybe it gave you the courage to stop apologizing for wanting to be loved. Whatever you take from this, I hope it stays with you. Because here's the truth. We don't get to choose the family we're born into. But we do get to choose the life we build, the people we let in, the peace we protect, and at the end of the day, that choice is everything. So if you're struggling with your own version of this story, here's my final message to you. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. You deserve recognition that doesn't have to be begged for. And you deserve a life where peace is the rule, not the exception. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for giving me your time, and thank you for reminding me that sometimes, the most powerful healing comes from being heard. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, choosing peace isn't selfish, it's survival.